The first time that I tried a beer, I was a preteen, and my dad was letting me have a drink of his. And I remember this very vividly. He handed it down and he said, "Okay, if you insist, you can have a sip," because of course I've been asking repeatedly to try this. And he knew what the outcome was going to be, just as all of you do. The first time you had a beer, you put it to your lips, you take a sip, and you're expecting it to taste like ambrosia. And it doesn't. It tasted terrible. And in fact, the memory I have is that it tasted like railroad tracks. And eventually I got to where I like beer. And it turns out pretty much everybody has had that same experience. The first time you try beer, you don't like it. But at some point, it becomes to taste like that ambrosia that we thought it would. We develop a real affinity for it. So what's going on here? Well, it comes back to a principle that we call the mere exposure effect. And what this means is that once we are exposed to something, we begin to like it. And the more we're exposed to something, the more that we like that thing. Now, at some level, this makes sense to us. I'm a parent. A lot of you are parents, and often when you feed your kid a new food for the first time, their reaction is, bleh, I don't like that. Don't want to try it. And if you get them to try it, they'll put a little bit on their tongue and they almost immediately spit it out and have some histrionics about how terrible it is. But experienced parents, particularly those of you that have multiple kids, know sometimes, you just got to feed kids things that you think they're not going to like. And if you do that repeatedly, you find that often we're delighted that after a number of occasions, your child starts eating the thing that they hated the first time around. In fact, if you keep doing it, it may become one of the things that they love. And exposure to things doesn't just shape our preference for them, it can actually affect how we act, which is really at the heart of what creative psychology is all about. For instance, in 1999, they wanted to test subliminal type of messaging and see if they could affect the behavior of people based off of that. They actually recorded them as they walked back down the hall, leaving the experiment station. They measured the gait, the walking gait of each participant. For the participants who had no exposure to words, they walked just as they walked when they came in. The participants that were exposed to the positive words such as wise, astute, accomplish, their gait actually improved 10 to 20%. And the group that was exposed to the negative words like senile, dependent, diseased, you guessed it, their gait actually degraded. They got worse in how they walked as they left the experiment station. People that are exposed for long periods of time to even negative stimuli will develop a preference for that negative stimuli. For instance, we've heard stories about prisoners that actually missed being in prison because they had been in there so long. I'm sure you have shopped for a car at some point in your life, and if you have, you may have noticed that the salesperson become very eager to get you in the car and to do a test drive. And the reason for this is simple. They have found over 100 years of selling cars that if they can get you to take a test drive, you dramatically increase the likelihood that you're going to buy it. And why is that? It's because of the exposure effect. You find yourself utilizing most of your senses. You both see the vehicle, you're touching the vehicle, you smell that new car smell. And that exposure increases your preference for that vehicle to the point that you begin to desire to own that vehicle. Simply by exposing people to concepts, to advertising, to marketing, we begin to change and create preference for new items. But that also helps us explain why the advertisers with the largest budgets and the largest audiences are the most difficult to topple, because they continue to expose people to their products even when they're not actively using them. So we know that the mere exposure effect is a powerful one. Simply getting out there and putting your product and your message in front of people begins to shape that subconscious system with which we use to make decisions. And if you want to maximize the exposure effect, you'll utilize as many senses as you possibly can. Sight, sound, taste, tactile, hearing. In fact, perhaps the most powerful way to utilize this is to let somebody have a trial. Give them a test drive. Let them borrow your product for a few days and try it. What you'll find is they develop a strong affinity for it through the mere exposure effect.